Welcome, everyone, to the captive audience. It is the 9th of September, and I'm Kevin Horn. I'm here to share with you my latest hat, which I just saw the president wearing the other day, and now I have one. It's such a great hat, but it's a serious point. And the more time passes, there, all of us should feel free to doubt the president or anybody else in the government and leadership. And President Trump is famous for engaging in hyperbole, which we know is sometimes a kind of leadership through and messaging that involves maybe a degree of exaggeration at times. I've never understood why people say that he's a liar, because he's sometimes a little bit too much truth, in all honesty. But now we also have something very important to apply this to, because he says things that cut to the chase. Hi, Lori. He says things that cut to the chase, and he does things that solve problems that people say, you can't do that. And now I'm going to start off tonight's program with a very, very sobering video for you to watch, and also news about this. Putting a stop to crime in our cities and ending the pro-crime policies that spawned back in 2020 and before, with cashless bail, kind of a revolving door for criminals. The decision by the government to start making it very difficult, and by elected officials and legislators to make it very difficult to deal with mentally ill and people that also have mental illness induced as a psychosis from the use of the type of narcotics that we now see, such as crystal meth and fentanyl, that have left people in a state of, well, frankly, I think the video is going to kind of speak for itself here, and I'm going to let it do the talking. And I just want to warn you, this is really, really disturbing video, but I think it's necessary that I show it, because uh, this just shows you how quickly this can happen. So please watch it. I've turned down the sound. So I'm going to start it over here. This is the Ukrainian refugee girl. She's just sitting in her seat. This guy grabs her from behind with a knife and cuts her across the throat. And this video is only 30 seconds long, from looking to her cell phone to being gone. Just absolutely sickening and heartbreaking. And this is how quickly it happened. So I'm just going to say right now that it's so awful that this is something that they tried to cover this up. And not only, and this is the people in Charlotte who tried to make it so that even though this happened a little while ago, they tried to prevent anybody from seeing this video. And then the mayor of Charlotte said, it's terrible that we're releasing this video and that people are seeing it. It is spurring a conversation that's long overdue, and it has many facets to it. And they captured this guy. They found it was a pocket knife. It was just a pocket knife. And there were other people in that cart, in that train car. But look how fast it happened. And then the guy walked away, but they captured him. Turns out the guy's mother had actually said that she thought he was a danger to himself and others and tried to forcibly get him committed. And of course, the soft on crime liberal laws made that almost impossible. In fact, he had very recently been arrested and released once again. And I think there's some people that are responsible for him being out who need to watch this video literally on a loop for 24 hours until they just can't take it anymore. And this could have been Portland in the MAX train. This could have been literally anywhere in Oregon in a bus, because these guys are floating around. There was a guy that went to the Union Gospel Mission in Salem and stabbed 11 people. Fortunately, he didn't end up killing anybody. There were some serious injuries. Local elected officials, I won't name who right now, but said that they were surprised and shocked at the events. Well, if you knew what they're doing, this guy in Salem in the Union Gospel Mission had repeated run-ins, threatened stabbings of people, and been in the state mental hospital, and released because they said he's recovered. Lori, you're exactly right. And according to FBI Director Kash Patel and Attorney General Pam Bondi, they stated they're seeking the maximum penalty, whatever that is for this, for what happened in Charlotte. And I think this means we all have to also make sure we have our situational awareness in place, because we walk past people who are talking and to themselves, screaming. At any time, they could strike, and you just have to be ready. I remember there was a woman who was severely injured, not killed, but we just left the gym here in Portland, and some mentally ill, drug addicted, homeless guy comes out and threw a piece of concrete at her and hit her. And she's lucky to be alive, but and wasn't done. But there was a guy there who managed to sort of shoo the guy away and protect her. And this is not taken seriously by the Democrats. Now, I listened to the press conference today with the press secretary, Caroline Leavitt, and this was the media asking about crime in red states, and asked if the president was going to work with red state governors, just like he's threatening to do with blue state governors, to deal with crime in red states. And she caught him. I knew immediately what this was. This was a leftist reporter who shamefully was repeating Democrat talking points to obfuscate the issue that the problem with crime in red states is in blue cities. And that's the one consistent thing. The only worst thing about blue states is they, first of all, have some of the biggest cities, which are blue cities, Democrat-run cities. But then the governor is actually aiding and abetting the same criminal lawlessness that's overwhelming these cities. And so the fact that President Trump has said enough is enough, he does have an obligation. You don't have any constitutional rights if you can't go outside your home for fear of being killed or assaulted or robbed. And this guy here is actually the guy that attacked the Ukrainian refugee who had just graduated from college. And her previous address prior to leaving Ukraine was a bomb shelter. This guy is facing federal charges in addition to the ones that are being filed in the state of North Carolina and in Charlotte. His name is DeCarlos Brown. Long rap sheet. I won't go into all the details, but and by the way, I'm going to post this so that if you guys want to share this, you It's your judgment. You probably know somebody who doesn't think this is real, and they need to see it and understand it then. But anyway, he's facing federal charges because there are charges that relate to terrorizing people so they don't feel like they can actually ride in mass transit. It's an interference with mass transit. It goes beyond. And the guy, I think one of you said there that the guy did brag about killing a white girl. I'd heard that too. And so now in cities where they don't do enough about this, there should be these federal charges. It was a post 9/11 law that was passed, but terrorizing people so they don't feel like they can actually commute, yeah, that deprives you of your right to free movement, to make a living, to a whole range of things. The right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, period, full stop. And so this guy had been arrested 13 times and had been diagnosed with schizophrenia, and his mother didn't want him out in the street and couldn't do anything about it. This poor girl, there's got to be a law that's going to be named after her that does something to make it impossible for cities to allow and states to allow this kind of thing to happen to their residents. This isn't an oopsie. This is it was destined to happen. The other thing that's happening right now, and there's a debate going on, the Democrats have been doing this in high gear since 2020 in the George Floyd incident, for which there was somebody, at least one person, prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law and is in prison. But the Democrats have been touting that the biggest problem that exists is police killing black people, unarmed black people specifically. And the reason why it ties into this story is, as you saw from the video, the assailant of the white girl was a black guy. Here's the thing. The media didn't cover it. Yesterday, they refused to even mention the story. 0 times on CBS, I guess, or in the New York Times. Nothing. And now this video is forcing their hand, and you have people like Brian Stelter and I forget the other guy in CNN, basically saying it's race baiting and making excuses for this. Stelter went so far as to say that this isn't even about the crime. It's just about whooping up MAGA, which, I'm sorry, but this isn't limited to MAGA. This is everybody who thinks you shouldn't be stabbed to death in mass transit or anywhere, especially by somebody who should have been either in a mental institution or jail. But here's a very good analysis by an author, Alex Berenson. He's a former New York Times writer. He writes a lot on COVID issues, and he's really sharp, but he also writes on a range of other things. I don't always agree with him, but I think you should give this one a read. And here's what he said about the incident in Charlotte. He said, "You've seen the photo. A man stands behind a woman, his arms raised in a frenzy. She sits focused on her phone, oblivious to the danger behind her. He's about to slash her neck and leave her to bleed to death. The man is black, the woman is white, and their races are no coincidence." He goes on to point out that black men commit a huge amount of the violent crime in the United States. Just federal statistics, period. Every statistic confirms this fact. He said black people made up almost 47,000 of the 81,000 murder suspects whose race was known to police in the last 5 years, according to the Federal Bureau of Investigation. Most of the killers are men. To put it another way, black men, who make up about 1/4 of the American population, commit over half the homicides. 1/14 of the American population. 1/14 commit over half the homicides. In some cities, the disparities are so stunning as to nearly defy belief. St. Louis has about the same number of black and white people. about 130,000, along with 40,000 Asians and Latinos. So far this year, St. Louis have identified 83 murder suspects. None are Asian or Latino. 3 are white. 80 are black. 73 of them are men. 7 are women. And he goes on to literally present the statistics right there for you. You can go read it. He says, I wish this racial gap didn't exist. But then he goes on to address that there is a real crime gap here. Now, it's still the case that the overwhelming number of black people and the overwhelming number of white people don't commit crimes, much less homicides. So this doesn't mean you make generalizations about each race. You don't. You don't have to. You can just stick to the actual facts. And we are not having a societal discussion about this. And by the way, the overwhelming amount of victims of black criminality, he points out here, are people in the black community, overwhelmingly. So there's nobody who knows this better than the black community. What we aren't having is a real discussion about this. And you still have Democrats that say that we shouldn't have police around. By the way, there's black and white police. We shouldn't have police around. They still have this sort of tacit defunding rhetoric, even though they backed off of the most extreme, obvious versions of this, but they're still doing it. And they're still promulgating this idea that criminals are the victims, that it just couldn't be helped. That they didn't have food, or they didn't have a job, or whatever, and then they just had to go commit crimes. Well, you can't watch that video I just showed and say that. You can't. Let me see here. Is this working? Because I'm not... Okay. Okay, good. I just want to make sure that the post went through successfully. And so there's been some books to address this that he talks about, Alex does in this article. The left doesn't agree that actually incarcerating people who commit these types of crimes actually reduces the crime. They don't. They don't think it does, even though it's demonstrably shown to be the case that does work. In the long run, you can do all you want about root causes. In the short run, you have to protect the people like that girl who are innocently and have a right to live their lives in peace and not be threatened by this constantly. There are 2 false narratives that Democrats are putting forward, the left, and he points them out over the last 20 years. The first is that large numbers of black men are in prison for nonviolent drug crimes. Alex himself examined this argument closely, and it is almost entirely a myth. It exploded after the publication in 2010 of a book called The New Jim Crow by a civil rights lawyer named Michelle Alexander. It's been repeated ever since, even though criminal justice professor John Pfaff exploded this myth in a book called Locked In, The True Causes of Mass Incarceration and How to Achieve Real Reform in 2017. Pfaff is a liberal. And he pointed out that any serious cuts in prison populations would have to include the release of many violent offenders, which actually this guy, a liberal, favors. But he admits that it's a myth. And so, and he's saying, depending on the criteria, most of the offenders that were released would be black. So, but pretending that our prisons are filled with black men in there for smoking pot is just not an honest argument. And he said the second myth is even more maddening. It's that police are constantly shooting black men and unarmed black men in particular. Between 2015 and 2024, American police shot and killed 180 unarmed black people and 222 unarmed white people. That's the Washington Post database. Obviously, any police shootings need to be investigated, and if there's any evidence of officers acting without justification, they should be prosecuted. But the context here is really important. Over the same period, close to 100,000 Black people died of homicide. Again, the vast majority died at the hands of other Black people. The statistics could not be more clear. Police officers of any race present a far smaller threat to Black men than other Black men do. Unfortunately, the left will simply not acknowledge this fact. They keep trudging up these myths, throwing them out there, and frankly, distorting reality so much that people are making at some time in times very poor decisions about their own safety as a result. So I recommend taking the time to go and read through the rest of this. But in 2020, murders rose in the United States by 30%. Why? It wasn't just police defunding. They so threatened police officers for simply doing their jobs and facing lawsuits or prosecution, that happened here in Oregon, that if they ever got into a fight with the suspect, they might be the ones that would face those consequences. So they stopped doing their jobs in many of these cities. And he says here, big sections of downtowns in cities like San Francisco and Los Angeles became almost impassable, filled with open-air drug use, aggressive panhandling, and street crime. So he makes the case here that it is absolutely necessary to deal in facts and to face the realities both of what has happened in our cities and the fact that something needs to be done about it. It needs to be done quickly. And this is the thing. We actually have an entire political party who is completely uncommitted to stopping this from happening. That's serious. Anyway, I hope that was useful to share with you. That's the first part of the show. I just couldn't watch that video and then not go and say what I thought about it. And Trump is right about this. People have a right in these cities to be safe. All of the stuff that's being said about the National Guard, it's BS. There's no posse comitatus. They're not out there mowing people down with machine guns. They're backing up the police and actually making it so that the police that these cities have, which are not enough, can now go in and do the job of actually going after the criminals and arresting them, while the National Guard makes sure that there's essentially force protection for these police officers, and that there are streets where it's not possible for criminals to operate without coming to clash with National Guard troops and eventually the police. And the police are making the arrests, not the National Guard. Switching gears, there's some breaking news here today. The latest breaking news, there is a very good reporter named Chuck Holton. He reports for Newsmax and other outlets, independent journalist. And he has a site called The Hot Zone. I follow it. And he says Russian drones have been fired into Poland, striking Poland. Now, if you know what that means, Article 5 of the NATO treaty says an attack on one country is an attack on the entire alliance, obligating the alliance to respond and come to the defense of that country. Chuck is as honest as it comes. He doesn't exaggerate. He understands when there's skepticism about like Ukraine and a bunch of other things that are going on with Russia. But at the same time, he reports facts, and he says that the big problem here is that the Russians are now testing NATO, and they think NATO looks weak and won't respond. So let's watch what happens here, because this is a very serious moment. So that's just breaking news. I don't have anything else to share with you. You can go watch Chuck's program there. I just put in the link. And there's other breaking news. So apparently Israel went and attacked Hamas leadership located in Qatar. And Hamas, a long time ago, moved their headquarters out of Gaza for the fairly well-to-do and well-sheltered individuals that preside over Hamas. That's where the so-called peace negotiations have been going on, that have rendered the same result over and over again, which is that Hamas refuses to come to any peace agreement or to honor any agreement whatsoever. And now here's the complexity to this. It was in a country that's not only somewhat friendly with the United States, but the largest U.S. base outside of the United States is actually, it's a combined air, and I think it's just air and army, but it's the largest air base outside of the United States, is located in Doha, Qatar, or outside Doha, Qatar. And the Democrats and the media immediately jumped on this, questioning why this is happening and asking when we found out about it. And the answer from Caroline Leavitt was, we found out about it because the U.S. military was informed by or learned of this from the Israelis just before the attack. The U.S. military then would not accidentally perceive the Israeli jets that were involved with this or any other missiles or drones they were firing as an attack on the U.S. base. That makes total sense. And they took out these Hamas leaders who have been there for years, directing activities and, frankly, managing the flow of money into Gaza to fund the Hamas operations. And I want to just say, you want peace in Gaza? I do too. You know how you're going to get it? No more Hamas. That's it. There's no other way around it, because they refuse to actually even allow aid to get in without it going through them. And they refuse any peace agreements. They won't do it. So you can't make peace with somebody who refuses to stop fighting you and launching attacks whenever they can. And they are the ones who launched the October 7th attacks. By the way, they were also trying to create a division between the Qataris and the U.S., but apparently we did try to give a heads up to the special envoy to the Middle East, Steve Witkoff. Witkoff did warn the Qatari government ahead of time so that they were aware of it. But I'm pretty sure they weren't given enough time for someone to leak that to Hamas. And as it turns out, it looks like they have, in fact, taken out the leadership there. And I'm like, good riddance. If you want the war to end, root for the demise of Hamas. Not all the Palestinians, Hamas. I've literally seen videos of Hamas abusing Palestinians on the streets of Gaza. And those people are angry with Hamas because they don't want to fight anymore. But Hamas won't let them have food and abuses them, beats them up. That's a very simple thing. I think people can figure that one out. Here's some great news. An appeals court has directed the dismissal of a lawsuit that tried to block President Trump's layoffs of federal workers across a series of departments. An appeals court directed a judge to dismiss the lawsuit over the Trump administration's attempt to lay off federal probationary employees, stating that blue and purple states that lack standing to do so. These are all these lawsuits by the states. And when the states themselves aren't harmed by it, then all they're saying here is you don't have standing. The people who are being laid off might have might have standing, but not the states themselves. So Attorney General here in Oregon brags that he's filed like 38 lawsuits. You might find a lot of those going by here pretty soon. The ones that don't directly affect the government of Oregon in some way, shape, or form. And it was a 2-1 decision because it's a 3-judge panel. And that person the judge who dissented said, "I will not endorse the government's attempt to circumvent our nation's laws. I respectfully dissent." So apparently that's how bad it is with some of these judges. They don't know that standing is necessary under the law, but they're just dissenting. And it is so fortunate that we got the judges through that we did a few years ago at all levels of government, but particularly the Supreme Court, because here's the next piece of news. And I don't know how the Supreme Court's going to rule. I don't know. But I do know that some of the hijinks that we've heard from lower courts is all going to come to a head here, because those courts are just off the rocker, politicized, interfering with things. The Supreme Court has added President Trump's tariffs case to their fall lineup of cases they're going to hear oral arguments. And they are expediting the case to determine if he can use emergency powers to place tariffs on many countries. The Trump administration actually asked the Supreme Court to take the case and expedite the ruling. And of course, I think this then involves the current circumstances being preserved, which is that the president's emergency powers are not going to be rescinded yet, even though the lower court ruled against him. I think this is going to be very interesting, because everything that he's doing sounds very much like the conduct of foreign policy. And the law that he's basing it on, these emergency powers, and there are several laws which give him influence and power to do these types of things with tariffs, don't define or narrow. They don't explicitly name tariffs, and they don't define or narrow his emergency powers to exclude it. And so I think we're going to find out that when it gets to the Supreme Court, we might well see the Supreme Court uphold his ability to do these tariffs. It obviously is going to be terrible if the tariffs and all these negotiations, which resulted in tariff reductions all over the world, deals with various countries, then fall apart because of a court ruling. However, that brings a lot of pressure on Congress, who then would actually be the one that has the power to do something in this regard. I think that every member of Congress of both parties should take very seriously whether or not they're going to scuttle the results of all the negotiations that have gone on with these countries that have been actually been extremely unfair, imposing tariffs on us while we don't on them. And now we finally negotiated, much like you do in any other facet of foreign policy, lower tariffs with the countries that actually are willing to negotiate. So let's see what happens, as the president likes to say. And thank you for your attention to this matter. Here's economic news that I think is worth sharing with you. The Bureau of Labor Statistics has revised job growth down by nearly 1 million people through March. So in other words, the Bureau of Labor Statistics published a revision on Tuesday saying that the job growth from April 2024 through March 2025 was nearly 1 million jobs lower than they reported. And this is the first annual benchmark from the Bureau of Labor Statistics since President Trump fired the previous commissioner, accusing her of cooking the books to benefit President Joe Biden. And it really looks like that now, because this actually happened with even more reports prior to this. But the main reason why it's been consistently overestimating job growth during the Biden administration, which are now only now being revised downwards. That sounds a lot like election manipulation. It certainly undermines public trust in whatever process is being used to make these estimates. And they have consistently had to revise their estimates downwards later. So that person's been fired, and they're trying to get a replacement in there so that we can maybe begin to trust these job statistics again. The change, obviously, nonetheless, seems to address why Biden's economic message struggled to gain traction with voters in 2020, because they were lying. And they were saying the economy is doing great. Inflation is transitory. You guys are crazy saying the economy is not doing well. Well, oops. I guess actually the economy wasn't doing anywhere close to as well as they tried to claim. And there's other things in these job statistics that I think are going to receive scrutiny, including what they choose to exclude from job growth and from inflation. This is happening all over the world. I just saw a thing about how this is going on in the UK too. Absurd things being excluded, other things. I know. That's the thing. This should just be a no-brainer. This is data. And you not only report data, Lori, but you also explain it in such a way that someone else could see what decisions you made when there were decisions or judgments to be made that were necessary in order to create estimates, or what the basis of the data was and assumptions that were made. You're supposed to be transparent about all of that. Clearly, that's not what happened here. But look, the Biden administration, not great on transparency until he was out of office. There's some bombshell memos that have been revealed. Biden aides believed that Biden should sign the pardons that he put forward by hand, but he outsourced the approval to the vice president, who has zero authority to do that. Zero. And of course, he issued, I think it was somewhere around 95% of all pardons in the last 3 months of his administration. So after the election. And as we know, there's some famous ones, including Dr. Anthony Fauci, Adam Schiff, several others that got pardons for their involvement with the January 6th commission, where they destroyed evidence. And he was trying to make it so they couldn't face any consequences for that. Really dumb pardons, actually, if you ask me. But then they also might not be real. And so all of these things, he granted 4,245 acts of clemency during his 4-year tenure in the White House. And I said 95% of them were in the last 3 months. Now, that's not so unusual that there's a cluster of these, but this still surpasses almost any number of clemencies that have ever been done. And I think that this is just the beginning of the transparency. Yet 2 years of no job growth. That's right, Pam. So the FBI is now probing whether its own agents obstructed or interfered with politically sensitive cases. Material evidence discovered in previously secret prohibited access case files raises concerns about FBI agents' abuse of their authority and obstruction of investigations. Those stalled, thwarted, or corrupted probes involve several potential targets ranging from Hillary Clinton to Hunter Biden to President Trump. In other words, if it was Hillary Clinton or Joe Biden or Hunter, there were people actively interfering with those probes. So someone's got to go to jail for this, because you can't do that. But they're investigating. And for instance, FBI Director Kash Patel's team recently located a document showing then Executive Assistant Director of the FBI, Randall Coleman, wrote a, quote, memo to file, unquote, the day before the 2016 presidential election where Donald Trump defeated Hillary Clinton, laying out the unusual behavior of FBI managers after fresh evidence in Clinton's classified email scandal was discovered on former Congressman Anthony Weiner's laptop in the fall just before that election. You might remember that. Coleman makes clear that then FBI Director Andrew McCabe was briefed in detail about the discovery in late September, and there was a long delay to take any further action. That delay became a major controversy in the final days of the 2016 election because, as you recall, James Comey did come out and say that there was new evidence, and it might have affected people's perception of Hillary Clinton and could have led to her defeat. It's possible. But it was also the truth. And the Inspector General of the Department of Justice 2 years later scorched Comey and McCabe for their handling of the entire thing. So These guys are dirty. They've got to find it. There was also, remember, Deputy Attorney General Sally Yates? She tried to shut down. She said, shut it down um, with regard to an investigation uh, involving the Wiener laptop. She tried to order it be shut down. She is the one who Trump had to fire after Comey resigned, and they were in the caretaker phase looking for a new FBI director. She was the one, Sally Yates. So that name might come back to you now. So we've got a ton of cleanup to do. This stuff all matters. I'm just still shocked that we don't have anybody going to jail for it. However, there is an ex-FBI agent who leaked to a Chinese company and had his hands in a wide range of notable investigations. This is a former FBI official who leaked details of a criminal investigation to a Chinese company with a relationship with Hunter Biden, a Hunter Biden client. This person was involved with WikiLeaks investigation and Crossfire Hurricane. So they're now looking back to see if this guy Charles McGonigal, now known to have leaked the sensitive information to Chinese linked targets, tainted other investigations. There was the Chinese mole hunt, the defensive briefing given to Hillary Clinton, the baseless Trump-Russia collusion, the failed prosecution of Hawaii executives, that's a Chinese company, Chelsea Manning's leaks to WikiLeaks, the explosion of TWA Flight 800, and Al-Qaeda terrorist attacks and more. This guy, they should nail this guy to a cross if found guilty. And the fact that they covered up for Hunter Biden, Hunter Biden has been technically pardoned. I don't know if his was auto-penned or signed. We'll find out, I guess. But that's what people were. This is treason, by the way. Treason. So penalty, the ultimate penalty for treason is the death penalty. So I would really like to see them fully prosecute this guy and throw the book at him. That needs to be a message sent to everyone else who thinks that's a good idea. Switching gears here, New York is now telling people that physical activity increases your risk from COVID. And they're doing this as part of an effort to circumvent the Food and Drug Administration under the leadership of HHS and RFK Jr. And they are doing this also to promote and vaccine boosters. And we talked about this yesterday. And the FDA Commissioner Marty Makary and his top vaccine regulator, Vinay Prasad, are the targets of this move by New York. But saying that physical activity is a underlying health condition. Look, I know when I watched the people who were young and seemed to be dying of COVID early on, when they bothered to show a picture of them and they eventually stopped, I noticed that they were very, very overweight, and in many cases, and probably had other underlying health conditions as a result. And they tried to cover that up. That conflicts directly with the idea that physical activity is actually an underlying health condition and that you should be vaccinated because of that. I think that there's a number of athletes who might tend to disagree with that. But this is the war on health science that the Democrats are waging now. And I think this is something that we need to pay close attention to, because New York is literally stating things that are false. They're saying that vaccines stop transmission, especially for children, which we know for a very long time, the drug companies that manufacture these are saying, actually, we can't say that they do. So if Hochul wants to do this, I certainly hope they are subject to some lawsuits. It would be great, and I understand that doctors may have ways to do things off label and get people to if they really want it, they can get it. But this is a very disturbing thing that New York is doing, and you can count on Oregon trying to do the same thing if they aren't already. Well, we've kind of reached the end of tonight's show, and I do have one other story I want to share with you. It's a follow-up to last night. There's a state representative here in Oregon, a Republican, who voted for the tax increase in the transportation bill. And we're all dumbfounded by that, though he did say he thought 6 cents wasn't too much and that we need infrastructure, but he's a Republican, or was. And we announced yesterday that the news had just come out that he was switching to the Democrat Party, not independent or non-affiliated. He went all the way from Republican to Democrat, and he is running for re-election. Well, one of our friends and video podcast guys, David Medina, he does a really good show online, somehow managed to get Representative Cyrus Javadi to interview with him yesterday. And I'm going to just post this for you, and I think you should watch it. And I think that anybody who knew what Representative Javadi's views were about a variety of issues should have seen this one coming. I'm trying to remember his name, Representative Charlie Conrad. That was one that people were initially surprised at until they found out what his views really were and that he had been at this for a while on HB 2002. Well, it's not just taxes. Representative Javadi apparently has a number of issues where he believes, it's fair to say he disagrees with the Trump administration on many things. And to go all the way to decide to become a Democrat, which is the very party that's actually imposing all of the failure and chaos on the state because they control it. I don't see how that solves the problems he says he wants to solve by going to aligning himself with the people who screwed it up. Maybe he's going to learn about that. I don't know. But that was my takeaway from this. And then he used some kind of biblical reference with regard to, I couldn't make it out. It was almost like him saying that what we should be doing with aid, with immigration reform. Apparently he thinks that the most important thing is immigration reform, not border security. That's what I heard. Why don't you listen to it yourself? It's not short. It's 20 minutes. And some of the sound isn't super awesome on Representative Javadi's end, but I think you need to hear it. And you need to think about whether, if you're living in a district represented by a Republican, whether they know this, understand this, and can reassure you that they see things differently than Representative Javadi. By the way, there was also a very good interview with Ed Deal on Lars. And I do think that that's worth listening to as well. Ed Deal, obviously one of our favorites here and one of our regulars here on the Captive Audience, has some very good perspectives to share on what happened and how disappointed he is. And I'll just summarize, and I'm looking for the link. I know I have the link somewhere, but I'm not finding it right away. But in his interview with Lars, he explained that Representative Javadi ran on lowering taxes, holding the line and lowering taxes. That's what he ran on. And he went back and he looked at some of his ads just to make sure that he remembered this correctly. I happen to know somebody who, in fact, went out and was paid to knock doors for him in his district. And that person doesn't want to do it again and that was before the party switch. It was after the vote, but before the party switch. And it's like, I can't go face these people. We were telling people he was going to hold the line on taxes and fight to control spending. And then he does this. So I don't care whether you're Republican or Democrat. If you say you're for this and you're against that, be that. Okay. And and if there's an evolution in your thinking, be a lot better at explaining it than Representative Javadi did. Um, and I don't know, but what his background is, I really don't know that much about him. He isn't one of the representatives we have had on the program, and I've never met him or spoken with him. But hats off to David Medina, who did have this conversation and might have gotten to the bottom of it. The other thing Ed Deal said, by the way, is that when they met, they do these retreats where they get together and talk about what they're going to do, form a consensus around various strategies of how to proceed with what's the word well, like a policy position that they're going to all forge a consensus on. And so they have these discussions, out of the limelight, out of the listening ears of the Capitol, in a retreat in Silverton. And Representative Deal said, yeah, it was unanimous that we were going to oppose this gas tax increase and the rest of that package. Oh, here I found it. And that is significant, because if you go together with a group, form a consensus, and then you just change your mind and just do something different, including different from what you campaigned on, I think there's consequences. And he is running for re-election, and apparently he has stated that he has the full backing of the Democrat caucus, which means money. This is a seat that was Democrat for about 20 years, and then was won by a Republican, the mayor of Tillamook, who's, I forget her name, but she's now a state senator in what used to be Betsy Johnson's district. And Cyrus Javadi ran to succeed her as a Republican. I think that this is going to be a very important race, one that is going to establish whether someone's going to tell you the truth when they run for office and then follow through once they get into office. And maybe they should share their real views with you. I just recommend you watch it. And I will end the show there for tonight. I think we covered a lot of stuff. I know it was some heavy subjects, but I got to say, it was necessary. And I hopefully there's some thoughtful discussion for you to not only consider, but also to share with everyone you know. This is really important, to share this show with as many people as you can. Trump was right about everything, and some people are wrong, by the way, and we also have to call them out too. Many of them are running the state of Oregon, and we have to replace them. So anyway, I hope you guys have a great rest of the night. And I should have a special show on Thursday night. It looks like I'll have Representative Jeff Helfrich as a guest. We're recording the show at a time that works for him. And then, so watch on Thursday night for a special show that we don't usually do Thursday night. Tomorrow night, you'll have Donna Anderson and company. And it should be great as well. So tune in tomorrow night. Anyway, have a great night, everyone. And